The 5-year TIPS recent highs. Should you buy at the upcoming auction or on the secondary market? Plus, are we planning on buying any? Hello, members and super savers. I hope you're healthy and well. These are the 3 topics we'll be covering in today's video. Because as with most of our video topics, quite a few of you have been asking about the upcoming 5-year TIPS auction. No wonder, given that the real yield on TIPS across all maturities are quite attractive at the moment. And based on the fact that the September inflation numbers released just a few days ago seem to indicate that inflation may be sticking around for a while longer. For those of you new to us, TIPS stands for Treasury Inflation-Protected Securities. Check out our TIPS video compilation linked in the video description below if you need more details or a refresher. And as usual, here's our front of video disclaimer. For a detailed disclaimer, please refer to the end of this video. Let's dive in now, folks. The 5-year TIPS hit one of its highest levels in 14 years this past summer, and real yields on 5-year TIPS have kept moving up overall since August, as you can see from this yellow line here. Here's where real yields on 5-year TIPS stood at last week. As usual, let's do our break-even inflation rate calculation and compare the yield on the 5-year TIPS versus the 5-year Treasury note around close of market last week. The 5-year TIPS closed at 2.39%. Remember that TIPS are quoted on a real yield basis, meaning that this number is already adjusted for inflation. So an investor who owns this TIPS will always stay 2.39% ahead of inflation. As I always say to those of you familiar with I-bonds, think of the real yield on TIPS as the fixed rate on an I-bond. The 5-year Treasury note closed at 4.65%. Treasury bills, notes, and bonds are quoted on a nominal yield basis, not adjusted for inflation, meaning that to make these two numbers comparable, we actually have to deduct the rate of inflation from this nominal yield to get to the real yield. Now, if we take this nominal yield here of 4.65% and subtract out the real yield here of 2.39%, we get 2.26%. This is the break-even inflation rate, meaning that if inflation stays at a constant rate of 2.26% every year for the next 5 years, it makes no difference whether you buy these 5-year TIPS or these 5-year Treasury notes. On the other hand, if inflation will be above 2.26% on average over the next 5 years, then these 5-year TIPS would have been the wiser investment. And if inflation is under 2.26% on average over the next 5 years, then these 5-year Treasury notes would have been more prudent. If we look at just core inflation historically though, not even the headline CPIU number that's often quoted in the media. Remember, core inflation is CPIU less more volatile food and energy prices. If we look at core inflation, not because we all don't eat and drive, but because core inflation is one of the primary measures that central bank leaders and decision makers utilize for policy setting purposes. As you can see from this BLS chart of core inflation historically, even 2% core inflation has been generally the exception rather than the norm. It's just that many of the folks today have more experience with the exception years than the above 2% core inflation years. In any case, this break-even inflation rate concept is not always the simplest to grasp. So let me give you 2 concrete examples. Let's take a look at this poll that we ran a few days ago, where I asked the community if they thought higher inflation is here to stay. If you chose we'll get back to 2% sometime next year in 2024, you would purchase the 5-year Treasury note because 2% is below this break-even inflation rate of 2.26%, and you would get a higher real yield from the Treasury note. On the other hand, if you're among this larger group who thinks we'll never get back to 2%, you may want to consider the TIPS if you expect that inflation will be consistently above 2.26%, in which case the TIPS will give you a higher yield overall. For those of you considering purchasing at this week's upcoming 5-year TIPS auction, I will post the break-even rate as a community post after markets close on Wednesday, the day before the auction. So keep an eye out for that. Which brings us to the second part of today's video. Most of the Diamond NestEgg regulars on this channel know that my general preference is to buy at auction. And that's what we still do with all the shorter maturity treasury bills that we hold in our T-bill ladders. Remember the main advantage and disadvantage of buying treasuries at auction. The main advantage is that you're getting the same price as the big banks and other institutional investors who are buying in the millions of dollars, even though you may be buying significantly less, meaning you're basically getting the best price based on market sentiment and expectations at the time of the auction. The main disadvantage is that you don't know the exact price you're paying and the yield that you'll be getting when you place your order. You'll only know this after the auction has taken place. Now, in my mind, this is fine if you're laddering shorter maturity treasury bills at regular intervals in a rising interest rate environment, like we've been in since 2022, or in a relatively stable interest rate environment, like we're currently in the latter part of 2023, at least as far as shorter maturity T-bills are concerned. I think of it like dollar cost averaging into index funds. Sometimes you'll get a few basis points more, and sometimes you get a few basis points less. But overall, on average, you're either getting a higher rate if interest rates are going up, or you're getting a stable rate if interest rates are not moving wildly in either direction. And that's why we still buy shorter maturity T-bills for ladders at auction. When it comes to longer dated treasuries though, that you'll likely be holding for years, like the 5-year tips that we're talking about in this video, and especially given the current volatility in the bond market, it may make sense to just keep a regular eye on the secondary market and put it in order when you find a price-yield combination that suits you. This way, you'll know already when you place your order what the price you're paying and the yield that you'll be getting will be. Remember though, while most of the leading brokers do not charge a fee for secondary market treasury trades, they do have minimum order requirements. Typically, the minimum order requirement is $1,000, but that may vary by brokerage house. Let's look at this 5-year and 3-month tips. It's the tips with the closest maturity date to 5 years that I could find available for purchase in the secondary market with Fidelity at the time of this taping. If I scroll down, I can see that I can purchase $1,000 face value of these tips with a real yield of 2.32%. Compare this to the 5-year tips at the upcoming auction, which Fidelity thinks will have an expected yield of 2.22% at the time of this taping. So in this case, the secondary market tips might be worth taking a look at. Now, do keep in mind that this expected yield is based on market factors and can and usually does change up until the day of the auction. To be clear, I'm not saying this to dissuade you from purchasing at the upcoming 5-year tips auction. I'm simply offering the secondary market as an alternative, an option you might want to have a look at for those of you who want more certainty when buying a treasury security that is longer dated. Because if I were buying longer dated treasuries, I would want that certainty myself, especially in these uncertain times in the bond markets. For those of you who want to learn more about the pros, cons, and hows of buying treasuries on the secondary market, I've linked these secondary market videos in the description below. And this is a great segue into the next section of our video. We are not. Like I said in our tips videos in April, May, and September, I think real yields will go higher. And they have. And I still feel the same now. Our politicians in Washington continue to spend like drunken sailors, as I talked about in this recent video on when I think Treasury yields will peak. And with all the debt that our government needs to issue to finance that deficit spending, Treasury prices will need to go down and yields, therefore, up. If Treasury yields go higher, TIPS yields, almost by definition, also need to go higher, all else being equal. So I'm going to just sit back, keep buying my T-bills at auction for our various T-bill ladders, and wait, as we've been doing. Now, that's our financial journey. And as I always say, everyone's financial journey is different. If I were closer to or already in retirement, I would probably pick up a few $1,000s of 5-year and or 10-year tips at each auction or on the secondary market to slowly build a diversified portfolio of tips. Ride the wave up, so to say. And who knows, right? If there are drastic spending cuts or return to 2% inflation in the near future, I will probably regret not having purchased the 5-year tips that we're talking about today. I'm not holding my breath on this one, but only time will tell, I suppose. For now, based on the information we have, I'll just keep laddering my T-bills, watching the secondary market, and holding out for higher real and nominal yields, as I mentioned earlier. What about you? Will you be picking up some of these 5-year tips at the upcoming auction or perhaps on the secondary market? Or are you sitting this one out altogether? And if you are, why? Drop a comment below and let us know. If you're new to tips and have stuck with us until this point, then let me remind you again to check out these intro to tips videos first before diving into a tips investment. Tips are slightly more complex than I-bonds and T-bills and notes. All right, members and super savers, if you enjoyed this video and learned something new, I'd love to invite you to continue to support our channel through membership so that we can keep producing one-of-a-kind, objective, sponsorship-free videos for our super saving community. Come for a chat at our next live member Q&A on October 27th at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and check out our latest member videos. To learn more about Diamond NestEgg membership, check out this video here or visit our channel page or the join link in the video description below. See you again very soon with more brand new wealth building content for your financial journey.